Sign here, Mom. It's just a small loan agreement. That is what my son said to me, sliding a legal document across the kitchen table. While the clock struck 9 in the evening, I picked up the pen. I read every word on every page. Slowly, the way I had always read contracts in my years as a bookkeeper. The overhead light above the kitchen table caught the bold print across the top of the first page. It read, Loan Authorization, $52,000, dated March 4th. I set the pen down beside my reading glasses. My son, Kevin, watched me the way a person watches a door they expect to open any second. I smoothed the corner of the page with my thumb and said gently, "Let me sleep on it, Kevin." His jaw tightened. He tapped the table once with 2 fingers and said, "The offer window closes Friday morning." I nodded and said nothing more. What Kevin did not know, what no one in the world knew yet, was that at 2:17 that same afternoon, my bank manager had called to confirm something that had stopped my breath in the middle of a Tuesday. A lottery prize. $65 million. Confirmed. In my name alone. I had not told a single person. Not my neighbor. Not my sister. Not my son sitting across from me at that kitchen table, pushing a loan agreement toward my hands. And I was not going to. Not yet. Good day, dear listeners. It's Clara again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story all the way to the end. And tell me in the comments which city you are watching from. I always love to see how far these stories travel. My name is Helen Carter. I am 71 years old. I live in Columbus, Ohio, in a white colonial house my late husband Robert and I purchased in 1986 for $94,000. This house has held more memories than I have words for. We raised Kevin here. We celebrated anniversaries here. And when Robert passed in 2014, I sat in the kitchen the morning after his funeral, made a pot of coffee, and told myself I would not fall apart inside these walls. And I did not. The deed to this house rests in a fireproof lockbox beneath my bed, right alongside our marriage certificate and Robert's death certificate. I have always known exactly where every important document lives. For 28 years, I worked as a bookkeeper for a manufacturing company called Harlan & Sons. Numbers were my language long before spreadsheets existed. I retired at 63 with a pension of $1,840 a month and a reputation for catching errors that no one else noticed. That skill never left me. It lives in my hands the same way a pianist keeps muscle memory long after the recitals end. Kevin is 44 now. He lives across town in a 4-bedroom home with his wife Cheryl and 2 children. For the past 2 years, he had been helping me manage my online banking and digital accounts. After a tremor developed in my right hand, he was listed as secondary authorized user on my checking account. I trusted him completely. I used to tell my neighbor Donna over the fence, "I don't know what I'd do without Kevin." But I have always kept a separate spiral notebook. Dark green. College ruled. I record every transaction by hand, with the date, the amount, and the purpose. I began that habit the year Robert passed, when I realized grief makes you forget things you cannot afford to forget. If it isn't written, it didn't happen. That is what I tell myself. And lately, certain numbers in that notebook had stopped matching my bank statements. The first time Kevin asked me for money was 6 weeks before that Tuesday night. He arrived at my door on a Sunday at 6:40 in the evening, leather portfolio under his arm. He sat across from me at the same kitchen table and said, "Mom, I've hit a rough patch. I need you to co-sign a short-term business loan." The amount on the first page was $27,500. He had a way of making things sound simple. His voice was calm. His hands were folded neatly. But I flipped to page 3 of the document and found the co-signer liability clause. It stated clearly that full repayment obligation transfers to the co-signer upon borrower default. I ran my finger beneath the sentence without comment. Kevin said, "It's just paperwork, Mom. You won't owe anything unless I default." I looked up at him. He looked away first. I set the portfolio down and said, "Let me review this with fresh eyes tomorrow." He sighed. He said, "I really need this by Tuesday." The deadline circled in red ink on the cover page read February 10th. Something felt rushed, in a way that had nothing to do with ordinary business timing. I said, "I'll call you Tuesday morning." He left without finishing his coffee. That was the first time I kept my green notebook open on the kitchen table after he drove away. 3 days later, I compared my January bank statement against my notebook and found something I could not explain. A transfer of $6,200, dated January 22nd, appeared under authorized online transfer, secondary user. I whispered, "I never approved this." My pen hovered above the page. I called the bank's customer line at 9:08 in the morning and spoke with a representative named Carol. The phone felt cool against my ear. She confirmed the transfer was initiated using secondary user credentials linked to my account. Kevin's credentials. I thanked Carol, hung up the phone, and sat very still in the kitchen chair. The refrigerator hummed steadily behind me. The morning light came through the window at a low angle and made a long rectangle across the linoleum floor. That evening I asked Kevin about it during a phone call. He laughed lightly and said, "Oh, that. I covered your utility renewal." "You're welcome." I pulled out my utility bill from January. It showed $214, paid on January 14th, 8 days before the transfer. The numbers did not match. Not even close. That night, I opened my green notebook to a fresh page and wrote across the top, "Unexplained transfers. Track everything." Beneath it, I listed the date, the amount, and Kevin's explanation word for word. I told myself quietly, 1 mistake is possible. 2 is a pattern. By the time I reached the bottom of that first page, I had found 3 more entries that needed answers. The pressure came faster after that. On a Thursday evening in February, Kevin called at 8:55 at night, which was unusual. He spoke quickly, the way people speak when they are reading from a list. He said, "Mom, I need you to move $15,000 into a joint savings account I set up for us." I asked him to email me the account details. He said, "It's faster if we just handle it over the phone." I told him I preferred to review paperwork in person first. His voice shifted. Something cooled in it. He said, "I'm trying to protect your money, not steal it." The word steal appeared in that sentence before I had used it myself. I wrote it down in the notebook after we hung up. 2 days later, he arrived in person and placed a new document on the table. It was a joint account authorization form, with both our names already typed. He said firmly, "Just sign this so I can manage your savings more efficiently." I read the form carefully. It granted him full withdrawal authority with no stated limits. I folded it in half and set it aside without comment. He stood and said, "Mom, you're making this more complicated than it needs to be." I looked at him steadily and replied, "Then explain it more simply." He did not. He left at 7:22 that evening. I added 3 more lines to the green notebook the moment his taillights disappeared from the driveway. March 4th began like any other Tuesday. I watered the small rose bushes along the front porch at 6:30 in the morning. I made oatmeal. I arranged my receipts from the week in their labeled envelopes. At 1:30 in the afternoon, I drove to First Federal Savings Bank on Elm Street for a private appointment I had scheduled 3 days earlier. I had decided to bring the notebook. My branch manager, Mr. Gerald Watts, had worked with me since 2009. He greeted me with a careful expression. The office smelled faintly of stale coffee and printer paper. He said, "Mrs. Carter, I'm glad you came in." He had already pulled my account history before I sat down. He spread a printed summary across the desk. It showed 7 transfers over 11 weeks, totaling $31,650, all processed under secondary user credentials. I placed my green notebook beside his printout. Every figure on his page matched a line in mine, plus 4 he had not yet flagged. Mr. Watts said quietly, "This activity meets the threshold for a formal fraud review under federal banking guidelines." He slid a document across the desk labeled Suspicious Activity Documentation, Internal Use. I signed my name at the bottom without hesitation. The paper felt rough and deliberate beneath my fingers. For the first time in weeks, I felt something solid beneath me. Then Mr. Watts cleared his throat. He said, "Before we continue, there's a second matter I need to raise with you privately." He turned his monitor to face me. The screen showed a verified notification from the Ohio Lottery Commission. Linked to my account number. The confirmed prize amount read $65 million. He said carefully. This came through our system at 2:17 today. You are the sole confirmed ticket holder. I stared at the screen. The hum of the office air system was the only sound in the room for a full minute. Then I said, Mr. Watts, I need you to keep this completely confidential until I tell you otherwise. He nodded slowly. He said, That is entirely your right, Mrs. Carter. I drove home in silence. Both documents, the fraud summary and the lottery notification, were sealed in separate envelopes inside my handbag. I placed them in the fireproof lockbox beneath my bed, next to Robert's death certificate. I said softly to the empty room, Not yet. Silence, I have come to understand, is not the absence of power. It is power held in reserve. That evening I called my neighbor Donna, not to tell her about the lottery, but to ask for the name of her estate attorney. She said warmly, Oh, that's Patricia Engel. She handled my mother's entire trust. Brilliant woman. I wrote the name and phone number on the back of a grocery receipt and tucked it into the green notebook. The appointment was scheduled for March 9th. 5 days away. When Kevin arrived on Tuesday night with a $52,000 loan agreement, I was fully prepared. I read every page. I set down the pen. I said, Friday gives us both time to think clearly. He believed the delay was uncertainty. It was the opposite of uncertainty. After he left, I sat at the kitchen table under the yellow overhead light and added one final line to that night's notebook entry. I wrote, Kevin does not know. Keep it that way. The house was quiet. The lockbox upstairs held the two most important pieces of paper in my life. And on March 9th, I would hand both of them to Patricia Engel. Patricia Engel's office was on the third floor of a building on Commerce Street. I arrived at 10 in the morning. The elevator smelled like floor polish. Her assistant offered me water, and I accepted. Patricia came in carrying a leather notepad and a calm professional manner that immediately put me at ease. I set the green notebook, the bank's fraud summary, and the lottery confirmation on the desk in front of her. She read each document without speaking. The room was quiet, except for the soft sound of pages turning. When she finished, she looked up and said, Mrs. Carter, you've done everything right. She outlined two simultaneous actions. First, a formal fraud complaint filed with the Ohio Attorney General's Financial Crimes Division, supported by the bank's documentation and my personal records. Second, an immediate lottery claim processed under a blind trust in my name alone, shielding the prize from public record and from any claim that might arise from a signed joint account authorization or co-signer agreement. She said firmly, Once that trust is established, no co-signer document or joint account form can touch these funds. I exhaled slowly. The pen felt light in my hand when I signed. On March 14th, Kevin received a certified letter from the Ohio Attorney General's office, requesting his appearance for a voluntary interview regarding financial account activity. He called me within the hour. His voice was unsteady. He said, Mom, did you report me? I replied calmly. I reported what the records show, Kevin. There was a long silence on the line before he hung up. At the March 21st interview, investigators presented Kevin with a detailed transaction log. Every transfer, every timestamp, every credential match. His attorney requested an adjournment. The investigators granted 30 minutes. When the session resumed, Kevin signed a voluntary repayment agreement for $31,650. Every cent returned to my account within 90 days. This arrangement allowed him to avoid criminal prosecution, but the record of the investigation remained on file with the state. I was not present in that room. I did not need to be. The green notebook had already spoken. Within 2 weeks of that interview, Kevin's business partner, a man named Todd who had known our family for years, quietly dissolved their LLC. The notice cited irreconcilable financial discrepancies in shared accounts. The letter arrived at my house by mistake, addressed to Kevin at my address. I placed it in a fresh envelope and mailed it back unopened. That felt like the right boundary. Kevin's wife Cheryl called me on a Wednesday afternoon. Her voice was careful, soft. She said, "I had no idea, Helen. I'm so sorry." I believed her. I told her gently, "This is something Kevin and I will need to work through in time." She said she understood. The call lasted less than 4 minutes, but I thought about it for several days afterward. On April 28th, the $31,650 arrived in a single wire transfer. It came 3 weeks ahead of the agreed schedule. I noted it in the green notebook with the date, the amount, and 3 words: received in full. I did not celebrate. I simply closed the notebook and set it back in the drawer. The drawer made a soft wooden click. Some resolutions do not announce themselves. They arrive quietly, like a bill finally marked paid. In late April, Patricia finalized the blind trust, and I quietly claimed the $65 million prize as a lump sum payment of $46,200,000 after taxes, deposited directly into the trust account. I sat in her office when the confirmation printed from the system. I said nothing for a full minute. Then I said, Robert would have laughed until he cried. Patricia smiled and said, "What would you like to do first?" My first decision was modest. I paid off the remaining $11,400 on my home equity line and had the deed transferred fully into my name under the trust. The house on Birchwood Avenue, bought for $94,000 in 1986, was now completely mine. I stood on the front porch that evening while the neighborhood settled into its familiar quiet. The air smelled like cut grass and the first warm week of spring. Nothing about the street had changed, and everything had. I established a small charitable fund through the trust to support financial literacy programs for older adults in Franklin County. I told Patricia, "I know what it costs to not understand your own accounts." The fund's first grant was awarded in June. My name did not appear anywhere on the press release. That was exactly how I wanted it. Each morning I still water the roses at 6:30 and write in a fresh notebook. Dark green, college ruled. Before making oatmeal. The lottery ticket stub is laminated now. It rests in the top drawer of my desk beside a photograph of Robert taken on our 25th anniversary. He is laughing in the picture, head tilted back, the way he always laughed at things that genuinely surprised him. Some mornings I look at it and simply say, I kept quiet when it mattered. That discipline, not the prize, is what I am most proud of. I want to tell you something about silence. Most people think of it as a surrender, a passive thing, the space where words ran out. But I have learned that silence can be a room you build on purpose, a room where you do your clearest thinking, where you sort through what is true and what is pressure, where you decide, on your own schedule, what to do next. Kevin pushed documents across the table because he believed urgency was control. He believed if he made the clock loud enough, I would stop reading the fine print. But I had spent 28 years at Harland & Sons reading fine print. I had spent a lifetime understanding that the most important number in any column is the one that does not match. Documentation speaks louder than emotion. That is not a cold thing to say. It is actually the most protective thing I know. When you record what happens, when you note the date and the time and the exact words, you are building something no one can take from you. You are building a record of your own truth. And when that truth is finally read by someone with authority, it speaks with a clarity that no argument can touch. My life today is unhurried. And mine. I wake without dread of a late-night call or an urgent form sliding across a table. I water roses. I read slowly. I attend a monthly gathering at the Franklin County Senior Center, where I have started leading a small workshop on household financial record keeping. The room is usually full. People arrive with questions they have been afraid to ask for years. I tell them all the same thing. Keep a notebook. Write down every number. Check your statements. Ask questions. And if someone you trust is managing your accounts, check behind them. Not because love requires suspicion, but because responsibility requires attention. Peace is not something you find after the storm. It is something you build quietly during it. Now I want to ask you something, dear listeners. If you discovered that someone you trusted completely had been quietly taking from you, week by week, transfer by transfer, would you confront them right away? Would you raise your voice and demand answers immediately? Or would you do what I did? Would you stay calm? Keep your pen moving. Let the records grow. And wait until the truth was so documented and so solid that no one could dispute it? What would you have done? Tell me in the comments. And tell me which city you are watching from. Because I love seeing how far these stories travel. If this story meant something to you today, please subscribe so you never miss the next one. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And press the like button. If you believe that patience and documentation can be the most powerful tools an older woman carries, thank you for being here with me. I will see you in the next story.